Welcome back. And this part we are going to talk about bones and growth plates. So, bone and growth plates, why do we need to know about this and what's important it is and what is the growth plates anyway? This is quite a new terms for us as well as a yoga teacher because there are these little parts of the bones that is very important and quite crucial in the children. So, what is growth plates? If you see in the pictures, it's a comparison of the adult bones and the child bones, and these bones are long bones of the bodies. Long bones of the bodies is somewhere that you can find like the humerus and the legs, the femur bones, and that is the pictures of the femur bones. So growth plate is the bones located in the bones, and sometimes it has nicknames called physis. Almost every bone has this physis, and each part of the bones will have physis in two sides, normally have two sides. So the physis is made of specialized cartilage and it's located near the ends of the long bones. Because the cartilage is not calcified yet, so if you take the child to check up in the x-rays, the x-ray films, you would see these thin layers in a dark color, and that is the physis. So on the screens here, you would see that blue dot is the illustrations of the physis or the growth plate. What does physis do? Physis helps the bone grow. Yeah, both in length and in width. So when a child stops growing, the physis will harden and change its form into a solid bone. And boys usually or generally stop growing at the age of 16. Um, and for girls is around the age of 14. So they might stop growing or they might stop increasing their height around that age. If you see on the lower pictures here of the physis, which is another name, is the epiphysis. When we were younger, in a children form of bones, this cartilage, spatial cartilage, is quite thick. And when we get older, it's getting thinner and thinner. And at the age of 16, it's almost gone and it's already fused in and becoming a solid bones. About the growth plate, this growth plate um, is very important because it is the weakest areas of your child's growing skeletons. It's more fragile than the ligaments and tendon itself, which means that it's very easy to be injured or it is easily to get cracks. If there is injuries happenings near the area of the growth plates here, it will call fractures. So, physical fractures could happen um, at the joints, so of a long bone, right? Arms is also the long bones, your ulnar, your radius, your humerus, your femur, your tibia, your fibulas are long bones. If a child have an accident, it creates fractures, and the fractures up, often happens around the soft joints. So once the accidents happen and it creates fractures, it interferes with the growth of the baby. Of course, because these growth plates help the baby grow. So Fractures through the feces have to heal very quickly. Just like when someone's, as a saying, that a child's bones are bent, is easily to bend before it breaks because it's still very cartilaginous structures. However, it is important to bring your child to see a doctor if your child is having injuries within 7 days. Because the bones needs to be so if the bone needs to be manipulated, there may be so much healings in the physis fractures by 10 days, or else it cannot be moved. My daughter has an accident. She fell down from the climbing rod at her school. She did not cry a bit, but when we get home, we realized that she cannot raise her arms to take her clothes off, and she was so young that she cannot explain what was happening. So the next day, I took her back to school, and she seemed to be fine in the morning. There's no swollen or anything. But towards the end of the second day after injuries, she started having this swollen um, surface of her skin. So we went to visit a doctor and check her shoulder area, her collarbones, which is also a tight kind of long bones, was fractured. And the doctor said that it's already start to mend together to form the bones back into its original shape again. So for children, there are chances that the bones can be mend back or fused back together if they are younger than about 8 years old, I would say. So from 8 years old, our bodies and our hormone systems start changing, and our calciums of the bone is also developing. By the age of 14, if you fell down or if you have injuries, that bone probably won't fuse together anymore. So physical structures are common, and they usually about 30% of the injuries of the fractures happens around the wrist, fingers, and the legs. So please be very careful when you have small monkeys in your class because they run around and sometimes you are too slow to catch them. So the most important thing to consider is when they have to do uh, stacking poses or poses that require them to support on their own weights, and poses that might create a fallings or the impact on the joints. You should consider being more careful when you are doing yoga classes for the little children. Some activities such as gymnastics and football or running too much could actually cause the problems for the growth plates. Why? Because um, the bones or the joints are working or having these compressions too much. It is overused over periods of times. So some people were saying that if you are overuse the joints or overuse your body when you are young, you probably have less height, and I believe that is true. You might have think of the figure of the gymnast, especially Asian gymnasts. They are pretty small, so they are not growth so much in height, maybe because of the overuse or over practice the gymnastic practice. So let's look at this chart and see how cute they are. Do you remember I mentioned about the curves of the body that we have primary and secondary curve of the bodies? Right. So these are the development of four vertebral curves of our body. When we were babies, we have only two primary curves, which is the head, yes, and the round back. And then by the age of 6 months, you start seeing a baby will start to have their neck coming. They don't look like a baby doll anymore. They don't look like a doll anymore. So the secondary curve start to be appeared. By 7 months, you will start seeing when they're sitting, and then the curve will start showing that they have two primary curves and two secondary curves. So our skeletal systems change over time, and if you see these pictures, it gives you the idea of how the portions of the upper bodies and lower bodies are related. You see, when they are small, the heads are bigger, and then when we are bigger, our head is smaller. So when the head is bigger than bodies, the balance is quite hard. It's also very hard for them to do lots of balancings, or maybe to do movements that have to maintain in a center alignment. But they can manage to do that. Right. And this is the bony structures of the infant's and the adolescent skull. You see the shapes of the skull. We have grown so much, especially our jaw bones here that is getting bigger. And the skull head, the anterior part of the skull here. So when we were babies, we have these tiny holes that I mentioned. It's called the anterior frontanal. And then when we grown up, around adolescence, I would say that starting from the middle age, the school years, the bones already fuse together, and the structures of the bones itself are quite hard and condensed. So these are the terms that we might have to take a look at these terms in some cases. So the articular cartilage is the cartilage that's covered the ends of the bones in a joint. Bones is what? Is a living and growing tissue that made mostly of collagens. Bone fractures or the broken bones is the term that is used when we have injuries, and that injuries causes our bones to break. Diaphysis. Diaphysis is the shell of the long bones, and endostem. Endostem is a thin layers of the connective tissues that lies the surface of the cavities inside the long bones. The epiphyseal lines in adults who have stopped growing already, the growth plate is replaced by the epiphyseal line. So you don't have growth plates anymore when you are over 20 years old. Epiphysis is the growth plate. It's another name for the growth plate. So the round ends of the round bones is the part where they call the epiphysis. Long bones. Long bones are the bones that have longer structures than the height, of course, and than the width, of course. Okay, medulla cavities is the hollow interiors of the middle portions of the long bones. Oh, I have one slide to show you here when we talk about that. So, this is the reasons or the explanations of why we are different than the children's. Okay, so why do children's bone bend before they breaks? Because they still have these um, densities of the shell bones is less than adults. So it's like they still have more bubbles in their bones. And that's why children are more bendy than we are. So children bones are more porous than the adults, and the Haversians canals occupied a larger space in the bones of a child. However, when we get older, our bones will start to be porous again, and that is bad. So if we could maintain the movements and keep moving, it will help a lot in maintaining the calcium level in your bones. If there is any injuries happen to a child, um, you might have seen the x-rays. This is just for you to know that what are the types of um, injuries or fractures of the bones that could happen. So here is the long bones, and it's the plastic deformation of the ulna. Yay, around these arms. So it's too bendy. That's why sometimes we see kids doing plank pose with a bowing arms or with a less stabilized arms. They can do that with their own weights, but not too long. Okay, they can slowly develop or gradually increase the length of the periods they are holding in a plank positions. Um, let's say I normally not count more than 30. I usually count for just like 10 and rest and then do it again, do it again, do it again. It's better to do a short period of holding or weight bearings and then increase in repetitions instead of holding it for a very long period of time to slowly develop the stamina or the strength of the muscles and the bones itself. So if there is injuries that having twisting motions, it could create a spiral fractures. Ooh, yeah, looks so painful, isn't it? So please be careful when we do partner poses or when we are grabbing someone's arms. Kids like to play catch and tag, and if the one part of the limbs are stuck with another and they're trying to twist themselves or turn themselves away from that, these kind of motions could create painful effect as well. So green stick fractures is just like the fractures that happen when we chop the trees. So green stick fractures normally, if they are still young and it's happened along the long bones, it would be able to fuse back together. Oblique fracture is quite common. Another name is called butterfly um, fracture. So it's the combinations of the axial loading with the angulation, and these are not common in children. So oblique fractures is due to the axial overload of steering force. So the displacements of the stabilities could depend largely on the degrees of soft tissues injuries. Um, easily so for the oblique fractures, sometimes it occur at a flatter bones like collarbones and the ribs. So oblique fractures is quite dangerous if it happens along the rib cage because the sharpy textures of the bone that already breaks could harmful to the inner organs. Yes, it's your lungs. Okay, so transverse fractures is the fractures that is like a total cut on the horizontal lines of the bones. And these are the summaries of fractures of the bones, just for you to look at. This is not really break yet, but it's crack. However, for younger children, the cracks would probably be able to resolved, but for us, it will be quite painful and it might cause a person to have an imbalanced posture after the injuries that occurred.